Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. So glad that you could join us today. There are a lot of places that you could be right now, and you chose to hang with us for a little while. Our guest in studio today is Professor Joanna Kempner. Now, she's been here before, and she's agreed to return here today to talk with us a little bit more about migraine and some of the social stigma that has been associated with this disorder. She received her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, was a fellow in the Robert Wood Johnson Scholars in Health Policy Research Program, and is currently working on several projects related to the politics of disease and the sociology of medicine. How are you doing today, Professor?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. You know, when it comes to migraine headache, we've all been watching a movie or seen a television show, or someone that we actually know has said, "Oh, you know, I'm going home. I had to leave work early because I've got a migraine," or "I think a migraine is coming on." I do have a little bit of, quite a bit of experience with migraines, seeing that my wife suffers from migraines. She's spoken of an aura that she sees prior to the onset of a migraine. In your experience, what are the warning signs? What are the symptoms of migraine?
So an aura is something that only about 20% of people with migraine get. Auras can be visual. They can be something that you hear.
Auditory,
yeah, they can be auditory, and they come before a migraine, so they can let you know that the pain is coming. But even if you don't get an aura, people with migraine can sometimes experience other symptoms that let them know that migraine is coming, and they can be very odd. It could be yawning. It could be a kind of fatigue. There are all kinds of things that people report happening to them before they get their migraine. Sometimes people smell things that aren't there. And so forth. And then the migraine themselves, for some people, it's the kind of classic migraine would have a throbbing headache on one side of your head, lasting between 4 and 72 hours. Although unfortunately, in the case of your wife, much longer, that can happen. Accompanied by, light and sound sensitivity, and nausea. Some people don't get the headache. They only get the aura. That can happen. You can also not get the headache and just experience the other symptoms as well. So they're all different kinds of manifestations of migraine. The important thing that's linking them together is this kind of neurobiological experience. I think the real crux of your question is, how do you know if somebody else is having a migraine? And the answer is you can't. And that's the problem. It's an invisible disorder. And so migraine has come to be thought of as an excuse. And, you know, I'm sure there are people who use migraine as an excuse when they don't have migraine. I mean, I have no doubt that that's the case. But that doesn't make it any easier for those people who legitimately have a migraine. There was just a survey done in the UK asking employers what excuses they thought were more or less legitimate for a sick day, to use for a sick day. And migraine was in the bottom of the list. It was under a cold. It was under, a stomach ache. It was under everything. So migraine, I think, has been come to be understood as the kind of excuse you give. It's a lazy excuse. It's not even just an excuse. It's a lazy excuse.
No thought or effort goes into the lie, basically, right?
Exactly.
If some of these odd or strange symptoms that we're talking about can be associated with so many other things and not a migraine, and yet in some people they are associated with a migraine, I begin to see the difficulty in legitimizing migraine, playing little devil's advocate. You know what I mean?
So how do you know that these complicated symptoms aren't part of something else?
Yeah, I mean, the symptoms seem so generalized. It seems like until you're laid out in a dark room, very quiet, it's not necessarily a migraine unless you're someone who's so experienced with the migraine headache that you know for a fact. But if you're someone who's experiencing migraine for the first time, you might spend a great deal of time, effort, and money determining that what you're suffering from is migraine before you get some of this, some of the medicine that will effectively combat it.
That's absolutely true. And some people never get their diagnosis of migraine. Even though I have migraine running through my family, it took me years and years and years before I was told I had migraine. I just thought I had these bad headaches, so I didn't know what caused them. I thought it was because I had an injury to my neck or that I was sleeping wrong. I had no idea. So, I mean, people don't know that they have migraine necessarily. And headache specialists think that most people who have a diagnosis of sinus headache actually have migraine.
Oh, now that's huge. That is huge because I've been to the doctor on a few occasions and was told almost immediately, you've got a sinus infection. Take this, go home, and in 3 days it'll clear up. I never experienced a drip. I never experienced any dryness. It was just a headache. A lot to think about.
So the reason why is I think they think over 90% of people who are diagnosed with sinus headaches have migraine because that feeling of congestion without a drip is your trigeminal nerve pushing against your sinus.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe there's some other questions I need to ask the next time I go. Now, in your book, you explain that the pharmaceutical industry has done quite a bit in an effort to legitimize migraine medicine. Glaxo welcomes development of a drug is a huge advance in migraine treatment. And you say that it also demonstrated that at least some migraines could be aborted with a drug. Is this proof, finally, that migraine is real, or do we still have quite a ways to go?
Well, I remember Glaxo came out with sumatriptan. I think it was released in 1993 in the United States. Sumatriptan is known as Imitrex in the United States. And when I first had it, a shot, it was first came out in an injection form, my migraine just disappeared. And it was the most amazing thing I had ever experienced. And I just thought, finally, people are going to believe me that I have migraines, because if a shot can take away my migraine like that, then it must be real. Mm-hmm. And that is how doctors and patients talk about Imitrex. They talk about this miracle of a drug. It also legitimated migraine treatment because it attracted pharmaceutical interest to migraine medicine. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, doctors were getting a ton of funding, not just from Glaxo, but from all the other pharmaceutical companies who were interested in making Me Too drugs. And I think something like 7 drugs total were developed that were just the same kind of, tweaks on that same kind of drug. And so for a while, headache medicine was a really nice place to be. They were making real money. So that was a real boon for headache medicine. But I also argue in my book that the pharmaceutical industry in some ways undermines the legitimacy of migraine. Shall I talk about that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of the things that I noticed particularly in headache conferences. So on one hand, you had all of these headache doctors pushing the neurobiological paradigm of migraine and really pushing that migraine is this neurobiological disease and trying so hard to boost the status of migraine. And then in another room, you would have all the pharmaceutical companies selling their drugs. Mm-hmm. And they would have these huge pictures of women, with their hand on their head, trying, mm-hmm. having their migraines and then, taking their medicine and then feeling better. And it was a very striking comparison to me. So I went and I did a content analysis of advertisement for migraine. And by and large, all drug advertisements for migraine pretty much look the same.
Kind of playing both ends against the middle.
Yeah, well, they depict the average migraine patient as white, well-to-do woman, and she's easily treated with a pill. And she's usually with children. It's either because she's like a nurse and she's taking care of them, or she's their parent. And she's either in pain, and so she can't take care of the kids, or she's feeling better. She's taken them her medicine and she can care for her kids. And so the ultimate effect is that it portrays migraine as this highly feminized, very white disorder that keeps women from fulfilling their duties as caregivers, but which is easily treated by a pill. And I think that's a really powerful image mostly because of what it doesn't show. And what it doesn't show is legions of men who get migraine, people of color who get migraine who are significantly undertreated, or the 50% or so of people with migraine for whom these drugs are ineffective. We don't learn from those ads that the drugs are extraordinarily expensive and therefore inaccessible by much of the population. And so what the public sees, at least if we're in the United States talking about direct-to-consumer advertising, are advertisements that show migraine as a pretty easy-to-treat disorder. But on the other hand, we have a reality in which treatment is expensive, it's difficult to access, and it's not very good. And ultimately, I felt that this contributed to migraine's legitimacy deficit.
Now, wrapping up this segment, when we're talking about the stigma and the legitimacy deficit that exists around concerning migraine headaches and its research, I guess, what about vanity migraines? I remember when Botox came out, it was the thing to get, some Botox injections in your face, whether you needed them or not. Everybody was doing it. And then all of a sudden, it seemed that Botox was working for all sorts of different things, even migraine headache. Is that a scam, or is it a legitimate treatment? And if it is a scam, is it something that celebrities are saying, I'm this famous person and I suffer from migraine, so this is what I do? Is it one of those things where you get a celebrity endorsement in order to push a supposed treatment?
It's an excellent question. It's one that I don't think I'm prepared to answer, but I think you should stay tuned for my next project.
Absolutely.
I also think, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Now, where can we get a copy of Not Tonight, Migraine and the Politics of Gender and Health?
It is for sale at the University of Chicago Press's website or at Amazon.com or any other major book retailer.
And I understand that you do have a website as well.
Yep, it's www.joannakempner.com.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with returning guest, Professor Joanna Kempner. She's been here with us discussing the social difficulty those with migraine share and the need for more funding in headache research. And we've also touched on how the pharmaceutical industry has both helped and hampered research into this condition. It's been great having you here with us today, Professor.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm, and you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes.